Tim, it's our final event of the year, final podcast. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Can you imagine? We've been going since January strong, haven't we?
Yeah. Is this I guess we did take a couple times off here and there. So I think this is like number 46 or something for the
Yep.
year.
Yep. That's right. That's right. Very good.
46 hours of prep. And I was thinking that as we wrap up the year, rather than get into some hot and heavy topics like we have, I was thinking, much like wrapping up a project, we can wrap up the year. After all, we're project managers.
Let's have a retrospective here and see what we can make of it.
I know one of the things they probably, any project that I've worked on, probably the happiest and the saddest points of the project are at the end when we're wrapping up. The
Yeah.
happiest because you can see the effect of all of your efforts on the end user client and how it is that they're embracing their new system and their ability to get work done more expeditiously, more accurately. But the saddest part also because, typically my projects were anywhere from 2 to 4, one of them 6 years long. You develop strong relationships. So that's probably one of the regrets I have of any project that I work on. What yourself?
Um, Actually, a lot of my projects, probably the bulk of my projects, were pilots and research projects for corporations. And so mine would be usually about 4 to 6 months long, and I'd be using the same pool of resources. So we'd basically have a team of 1 through 10, and we go onto a client site. Now, the clients and us created a wonderful relationship, and that was exciting. But at the same time, like you said, um, there is a sense that we are never going to do that again, and that is a sense of of longing and wishing to open up the Christmas present of a project.
So what are some of the things that you think that we should retrospect about, if I can use that bad English vocabulary? How should we celebrate the end of this project?
Well, let's use the traditional method. Basically, what did we do well? What could we have done better? And what would we have changed if we could go back from today?
Wow, that's a tall order.
Isn't it?
Do we fill that? Do we fill the whole hour with that, or were we this good that we were only going to spend 5 minutes?
Well, let's spend 10 or 15 minutes on that and see if
By
we
the
can
way,
make anything of it.
By the way, I'm celebrating with a nice frosty root beer. So I brought my own beverage to our retrospective.
Oh, that's excellent. And I, as usual, have my cup of coffee here. Go ahead.
I think probably one of the salient points for me was that every single episode we did, we took a different aspect of project management. And I think one of the things I enjoyed was we both brought our collective wisdom to it from each other's experiences. And I love the fact that we were able to tell stories, that is real life events that informed our explanation of the way we looked at project management specifics.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
That's a really good call. For me, what surprised me and delighted me was the fact that we came about this from totally different areas. I come from a strong consulting background, but I was mostly a gun for hire, quick get in, solve a problem, get out, where you have the big brick and mortars. And I actually made a pivot halfway in my project management career to education. And so I bring a more academic perception, where you bring a more seasoned expert, where most of your project management knowledge is tacit. And so with your expertise that is muscle memory and my academic knowledge, we still come to the same results. We still come to the same realization of the value of project management, the components of project management that make good project management stand out, and all of the details. This is what blew me away over and over again.
So I think what that shows, at least to me it shows, is that education in project management, in fact, does lead to good experience, and good experience then can reflect back on education.
Yeah, and and the confidence that this is giving me a lot of confidence that the material in formal project management today is not theory. It's actionable. It actually is usable and can generate good success. Like, it is truly good practice.
Yeah, and that's that I came to that exact same realization. And I know early on, one of the things that we had talked about, one of the topics we talked about, and certainly reflects from my personal experience, was I had spent a lot of time with the various editions of PMBOK, and spent probably most of the time in PMBOK 5 and 6. And one of the laments I had and complained to you several times was how it specified so much process and so much, so from that perspective, I almost took it as theoretical because it just always focused on process. Whereas from my experience, I found that process, as important as it was not as important as the people aspects. And so we did bring a lot of the people aspects, the human factors of project management into our discussions as well.
Yes, yes. And actually, if you look at the maturing of the PMBOK through 5th, 6th, and 7th edition, it actually echoes your sense and your sense of nature, where leadership and management and human behavior and personal awareness and self and emotional intelligence, all those things start taking more and more of the spotlight of, this is important. This is a testable topic. This is what really makes good project management steps out.
So one of the good things we did in our podcasts over the year was, in fact, focusing our attention and those of our listeners' attention on people, on humans, on those factors that make projects work.
Yes, yes. That is a really, really sharp point. Now, what could we have done better?
Well, it pains me to say this, but even as I looked back and went back through some of our past recordings, and we may get some responses from our listeners, but there were times that I felt like, and I'm going to blame myself, but you were part of this too, is that we waxed eloquent for minutes at a time when we probably should have been a little more conversational. So I'm going to reflect on that, Tim. And in the new year, I'm hoping that our conversations are shorter and more, what would I say, more, not terse, but shorter.
Natural,
Yeah.
a natural conversation instead of a series of back and forth lectures.
Yeah. That you said it much better than I did. I don't know if you felt that way, but everyone, and it wasn't that way all the time. But every once in a while, I'd cringe. I think, oh, I could have said that in half the words.
I get that in a lot of my classes. I go off on a tangent, and I think, oh, I really care about this topic. And the topic may be important, but not as important as what the students need. And that's another area that I think we could have done better on. Now, I would like us to be able to use more feedback from our audience and be able to focus on the topics that are more meaningful and spend those minutes on the topics in our meetings that actually people need to know.
That's a very good point, because we can talk about what interests us, but if we are out of the mainstream, now I happen to have come out of retirement and gone back on a project, so it's not that long since I've left project management principles, and they haven't changed a lot. But I think you're right. If we can get more of that active discussion with our listeners, and bring up topics that they like that will be much more interesting to them and probably to us.
And for both your benefit and mine, you're on active projects, and right now you're in an agile environment too, which is fascinating. And I'm continuing to teach, and I'm listening to the constant request of certain topics. So as we move forward into the new year, let's both you and me be cognizant of what the questions and concerns and obstacles our project managers are having around us, and how we can actually bring that into the conversation as well.
You know, and I think that's one thing I appreciated. I think that you, it was probably half, 2/3 of the way through this year. I think you had understood that a lot of your students in your classes were asking the same types of questions. So rather than necessarily answer them in class, which you did anyway, but you also brought those to the forefront in part of our discussions, thinking that if they're of interest to your students, they must be of interest to the general project management population.
Yeah, and I'm dealing with somewhere between 300 and 450 students a month. So we have enough of a data pool to actually start with that as an assumption. And yeah, let's look at our schedule of events and how we're going to choose our topics next year. And let's actually keep that in mind, and I'll look at the data and validate that the topics we're choosing are, top of mind.
Yeah. And one of the other things I think we could have done better this year was, you and I think we both have very strong experience. Not perfect experience. Maybe we're not the people to put the man on the moon or the man on, the next mission to Mars or something. I'm not sure that we're that good project managers, although it might be interesting to try. But it would be interesting to have guests on with us that have maybe a different view of how to manage a project.
Yes, I would love to have that conversation. And for those of you who are listening and tuning in, if you're interested and you see something different, this is always an opportunity to leave a message in the channel and reach out to us. And we're more than interested in having conversations both outside and inside the show.
I think one of the other things, in terms of, we're kind of flip-flopping back and forth between what we did well and what we could have improved. I think one of the things for me that worked out really well was in that doing this show week after week and somewhat preparing in terms of the broad topic, but not necessarily in what we were going to say. But I got to once again hone my conversational skills in terms of being able to deal, first of all, with you across the airwaves, but also make it, I think, interesting for people who are listening to us without a lot of humming and hawing and that. I think we were pretty on point from a conversational point of view, aside from what I talked about before in terms of being lengthy in some of our responses, as I am right now.
Well, and lengthy is all right from time to time. It shows, you care about the topic and you're passionate about it. At the same time, you're right. I think as we got through, and I observed this as we started about halfway through, all of a sudden we hit that groove where we were comfortable and we were natural, and it just seemed to flow very easily.
So chalk that up to practice, not
Okay.
necessarily natural skills.
Right. So looking forward, what do you see as an interesting direction to take that? Because we've talked about so many different topics.
We have, and I'll tell you, Tim, one of the things that we have talked about, I addressed PMBOK 5 and 6. One of the things that we've talked about is the major shift in what's happening with PMBOK 7. And I know part of your passion is to get people ready to take the PMBOK exam for their PMI credentials. Maybe just in terms of looking at the shift in PMBOK 7, maybe we could tackle some of those projects and look at how project management is changing from even from the theoretical aspects? What do you
That
think?
would be great. And it's not just the 7th edition PMBOK. We see this whole wave. It's not just a change. It's a revolution from the talent triangle to the exam content outline. I don't know. I don't think the code of ethics has changed, but I know the talent triangle came out in 2015, the PMBOK 2017 6th edition, and now in 2021 we have the 7th, and then we have the exam content outline that totally revolutionized both how we train and prepare our project managers for the credential, as well as changing that whole mindset. And part of it is the adoption and integration of Agile into what we're talking about, as well as, this intense focus on both leadership and an understanding of business.
Oh, exactly. And from our conversations that we've had even outside of this podcast, that my push, even in my own company, is on putting people first, which includes our clients, because, we can't do these projects without having client staff completely passionately involved in what their end product will look like. And so I have spent a lot of time making sure that the personnel, both from the client side and from our project team side, are well prepared to do their part. And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to look at as well, to see how PMBOK 7 and some of the things that you just talked about influence and inform the people side of the equation.
You bring up a thought. Software development, software engineering, even industrial engineering and construction, and all these disciplines have this model called human-centered design. And that speaks to the need to bring, I hate to use the term voice of the customer into the product or into the value, but that's basically what it is. It's who is this for and what is this result? And I'd like to explore with you what human-centered project management would really look for. And are we doing it today? And if not, is that a relevant objective?
Oh, it's huge. In fact, the project that you talked about before, the one that we're doing from an agile process, we have introduced human-centric design as part of the upfront aspects, including going out early and talking to the end user customers and getting their feel for what would make a good design that they could use in their day-to-day work. So that's absolutely a great topic that we should tackle.
Yes, and one other thought. Business and business theory is doing this flip-flop too. Back in 1979, there was the reintroduction of a discipline in economics called behavioral economics that say human behavior is a driver of so much. And then in 1984, business took a sidestep and said, basically the shareholders should be the decision makers because they're the investors. And that caused a shortcut for short-term gains. And along come Peter Drucker and W.E. Deming and some of the other people that I study, and they say, there goes your long-term strategy. So they were promoting, taking care of the workers, focusing on the stakeholders, and that was the primary job of the executive. And I'd like to actually explore how business is actually focusing on what project management is heading towards and what engineering, the actual work of the deliverable, has known all along.
Boy, that would be, even as you were mentioning that, my mind was racing in terms of just some of the experiences that I've had recently. Particularly the most recent projects I've had have been very customer centric. And when I say customer centric, I mean business took the lead. where IT supported that. So yeah, this would be an interesting interesting topic in terms of exploring where that goes, because clearly IT has the roadmap, but business has to satisfy what they need to do, first of all, to satisfy their own customers, but most important, to stay competitive. And sometimes the IT, in going for their roadmap of what's great in IT, aren't always paying attention to what business needs to remain competitive. So there's always that that tension between the two.
You know, it's and again, when you have tension, you have constraints.
Yep.
But constraints sometimes are not resolved, and you balance them. And that takes us back to the talent triangle. The value of leader, the value of the technical competency of project management, and the value of the understanding of the context of business and the role of business in our work. And putting all three of those together, I think we can actually have a really interesting, well-rounded discussion, not just an introduction to these concepts, but maybe even a bit of forward thinking.
Wouldn't that be forward thinking?
Yeah, that's scary for us to come up with some innovations here. I think that would be exciting.
Well, the other thing that crossed my mind, and I think we tried to do this a little bit during our podcast, but we didn't necessarily focus on it. But going into next year, what I'd really like to do is see if we can't boil down certain of these project management principles into simple rules. Sometimes we make it so complex because it makes us feel good. You know, we walk down the corridors and the users look and say, look, there's that project manager. He's so smart. But I think if we can boil things down to keeping things simple and maybe exploring some aspects there, that we can perhaps be forward thinking in that way.
Well, also it demonstrates a certain level of mastery. If you've ever known experts know the rules, and they know 500, 1,000, 10,000 rules. But a master has almost forgotten the rules because it becomes muscle memory. And all of a sudden, they don't have those 10,000 boxes they check. They have maybe 7 to 12 little boxes. And based on the simple scenarios, let's pull up this box. Oh, here's the 3 to 5 things I need to check. What do I need to check? And you're right. This is the whole simple rule model that we can actually start playing with in the back of our minds.
Well, and you reminded me of some of my heroes in the business, some of my mentors. They had the rules, they understood them, and like you say, they were muscle memory. But they also knew ways in which they, if I can use this phrase, break the rules. No, not break, bend the rules. Because, you know, if you end up being so disciplined and so tight in the way that you approach a problem, you can't flex, you can't bend, you can't, and not every single situation in a project is cookie cutter. You have to be able to work around some of the challenges that you have, and some of them don't fit the rules.
And in some areas that we go, there aren't any rules yet.
Yes, exactly.
So before we go further, I want to introduce you to something, and we can actually bring broader and deeper theory into these discussions. For instance, what we're talking about, there's a guy by the name of Dreyfus. And this came up when Dan North, who was a software engineer out east, started understanding how to lead agile teams. And Dreyfus had this idea about how people learn, and it was all about rules. And he broke it up into 5 categories. Okay, you have a novice who needs rules, and then you have an advanced beginner who tests the rules, and then you have somebody who's competent who applies the rules. Those are the guys who, you know, are the experts. And then you have somebody who's proficient, who has rules to fall back on if they need to. And then you have experts who transcend the rules. And the rule breakers, I think, probably were your rule transcenders.
Yeah, you're probably right. And as you were listing those, I just reminded myself that I am all of those. There are parts that I am still learning. There are parts that I've forgotten about, but do anyway, because it's so much part of my natural bent towards that. But yeah, as long as I think as project managers, we absolutely need to keep learning, keep reminding ourselves where we're good at, what we're good at, and then where we still need to improve.
Yes, 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 yes. We are the eternal students. As good leaders, we remind ourselves that we have to not only learn ourselves to get ahead, but also we need to demonstrate to the rest of our people around us that learning is just a part of the way we work.
Well, and part of how you and I helped each other learn this year over these podcasts, and probably one of the things that we did well was in storytelling. A lot of times I could not make my point by simply um, waxing eloquent about the theory or whatever, but when I brought in an experience, I could in 25 words, through a picture of how I had experienced something, make much more sense than a theory of 1,000 words, because I'd lived it and I was able to recount it. And I think you and I learned from each other that way, just by listening to each other's stories.
Yes, yes. And I've made a personal commitment, both in my classes and in this show, to adopt a deeper and a stronger attachment to using stories.
In fact, when I recall when I kind of went over and grabbed a couple of our past episodes and went and listened to them again, even if I didn't listen to the whole show. Often we would begin with a story, and I think it was very attention getting from the way those stories began the process, and then we could elaborate on the thoughts that we were having at that time.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So what were the things that we talked about that you thought were the most important to get out of to our audience this year? Let's do a laundry list in the chance that we may want to revisit these next year.
Wow, I know that you and I had originally started off with project management principles, the kind of the arts and charts. Well, not necessarily all the processes, but truly principles around project management. And I recall that as you and I went through this, a recurring theme kept showing up, and that was communication, relationships, mentorship, and ongoing learning. At least that's four of the several. But when I went back and looked at some of the podcasts, those themes unintentionally kept coming up. And so I think that's the part of maybe we can continue on and look at different aspects, say, of communication, different aspects of mentorship, different aspects of ongoing training. I think those are some of the things that struck me anyway.
So what's interesting is the 7th edition of the PMBOK doesn't talk about processes, but it talks about behavior and principles, which are a lot of what you're talking about. It's not, like you said, the arts and charts, but it's the human components.
Yeah.
I've begun, and we can actually consider this. I've begun actually teaching not necessarily to the flow of processes, but to actually the behavior and the principles, and using examples and stories to that. And it seems to be much more relevant to the people who have been doing this work for a while, but are just beginning to connect the dots.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because people can learn. It's funny, because especially for younger project managers or project professionals coming out of college. You've learned in college to memorize, to learn, to understand facts and process. When you get into the real world, that's still important, but it's so much more important to be able to relate. And part of relating is those stories. It's those human, like you said, the human factors. I remember we had one show, we talked about the project manager as a communicator. The whole show was on us being able to communicate vision and that sort of thing to our charges.
One of the things that I think would be really valuable too is having something that we and our listeners can take out, maybe as a tool or an exercise or an experiment. Um, Again, you can build a spreadsheet and you do it 5 times and you don't have to get any better than that, and it works great. But with relationships, there's a constant sharpening of the saw, and there's a constant development. You can't become a perfect communicator. And
Right.
so maybe as we start exploring these attributes and these principles, we can actually start looking at, maybe we can actually recommend experiments or tools or something, and we can reflect back on that in future shows and say, how did that go and did that work well? And we can actually start incorporating on that too. I think that would be fun.
Are you saying getting some of our listeners to try out what we're suggesting
Yeah.
and then
Oh yeah.
report back? And
Oh
then
yeah.
report back.
And not only that, but us doing it too.
Oh
And
yeah.
us doing it and reporting our results. I think if we can demonstrate and show our leadership through taking the lead on this, I think we can actually, at the very least, we can talk about our examples and our results and actually
Yeah.
say, this is something cool, and these are the problems I had, and this is what I had to learn.
Well, and the one caveat for our listeners is that just because it worked well for you or I, not every situation is the same. And we might be in a different situation trying the same thing and it might not work. So these principles, I think what happens is with experience comes wisdom, comes that muscle memory of I touched that stove once before.
Yeah.
Don't want to do it again. So I think there's also, I love that idea, but we just don't want to leave our listeners with the idea that this will always work in every situation.
Yeah, and it's like simple rules. Simple
Yeah,
rules are simple because they don't fix everything. They
correct.
they fix a set of scenarios. And if we can keep it within that scope, I think not only can we bring some tools, but we can start exploring your concept of simple rules.
Yeah, the other thing that struck me, even as you were talking just now, was how often we ended up touching on management versus leadership, and how that may be another topic that I don't think we exhausted this year. I think there are aspects of that we can also bring forward,
Well,
particularly in the servant leadership area as well.
yeah, and servant leadership, I think we're actually running into our strength. We're finding our stride there. And I think you and I can explore the same thing in management, because management is more directive and it has to show results,
Right.
where leadership shows results, but it's expected, it's strategic, and it's results over time, where management says, no, we have to have this done by the end of the day. And I think you and I can actually explore that a lot as well.
And I think we also touched on ethics a couple times. Um, it all comes down to integrity, and if we don't have that, in fact, I just read, I should have grabbed it for this show. Was Warren Buffett, who people know as one of the greatest investors this world has ever created, talked about three character traits that he looks for in his staff. And I forget what they are. I forget what the first two are, but let's say it's leadership and ability to get things done. That's probably not what it is, but let's say that's what it is. And the third he said was integrity. But he said, but if you have a person that has no integrity, then I don't want him to be a good leader or be able to get things done. I want him to be a poor leader and keep out of the way. So it's
Right.
some of those things that integrity, ethics, all of that becomes part and parcel of what we do.
And you know what? I think we could spend a lot of time on that. Just the etymology, just the history of the word itself, integrity, could be a whole show. It's fascinating, and there's 6,000 years of documented discussion on the value of integrity and what happens when leaders don't have it.
So I'm sensing that our that our retrospective has actually shifted into lessons learned,
Yes.
which is part of what we've done well and what we could have improved upon. I think there was truly are lessons learned. So.
Yeah, and again, I think that we do agree that we have not exhausted these categories at all. And I think with a refreshed approach and maybe a different framework and a different roadmap, that we can actually release a bunch of shows that are not just relevant and meaningful within the topics that we've touched on, but actually can go deeper and extract much more value out of them.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Maybe looking at a very critical aspect of one topic and just digging down, and maybe coming up with several experiences that we had where we succeeded using that particular process, or where we also could have done better using that particular process or effect. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Let's do that. Let's start putting our heads together. We're not going to have another 2 shows here, are we, for the next 2 weeks?
No, and I'm going to break a rule here, Tim, because these podcasts are supposed to be evergreen, but
Right.
It is the end of the year and we are approaching the holidays. So the lack of evergreenness about this show is that we are approaching the holidays, and yeah, well, I'm going to just enjoy some time and take a little vacation with my family. We're going to get on an airplane in this time of COVID, and we're going to just go away and enjoy ourselves. How about yourself?
That's excellent. My holiday is going to be rather quiet. I have all my family here within about 20 minutes. We're going to have small visits, and we're going to have 2 or 3 dinners together. We're going to celebrate, but I'm going to spend time with some of my old friends, which are not just people I haven't talked to in 3 or 4 months, but books I've been wanting to read and research I haven't had time to look at, which will actually give me a fresh perspective on not just this show, but on my whole career and my whole knowledge base.
Well, and you mentioned books, and I'm looking over to my right that I'm starting to pack for my trip. And I've already, first thing I put out was my books, my vaccination card and my books.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there's, and again, you know what? Maybe we could actually talk next year about what a good library for a project manager needs to have. I think that would be really fun.
Well, it would be fun. In fact, let's even explore that now. We've got a little bit of time, but if you looked at my library, I have my project management books over here where I can see them. But I have a whole shelf of probably a couple hundred business books, which are not specific to project management, but are more specific to what you and I would call the human-centric aspects of just being in business and just being a good citizen of this wonderful world we live in. And then straight ahead of me are about 75 books on communication, public presentations, and how to use techniques such as what we're doing right now. So it's, when we talk about a library, we're not talking about just a library of technical project management.
Right. I have my technical business over here, basically operations and finance and accounting and legal and all those reference books you pick up in business school. And over here, I have my current reading list, as well as my most prized philosophy books. And behind me, I have an entire shelf of leadership and strategy. And then I have a bunch of history. And then I have a bunch of biographies. And it goes on and on and on. And you're right. It's all about human nature and human behavior.
So biographies, I've got a few as well. And here's the other aspect that I want our leaders, our listeners, especially the younger people to understand, it's not just biographies of those people who have developed the computer sciences. It's the biographies of great leaders of history, of great innovators of history, of people who have truly influenced, because as project managers, we want to be influencers. So there are aspects of those biographical write-ups that we can pull into our own experience and use on our projects.
I want to challenge you on this. Let's just for right now talk about this whole thing that you said, influencer. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean as a project manager as influencer?
For me, an influencer is a way, and again, we've talked about this several times in terms of, I don't believe we can motivate people to do something, but I do believe we can demotivate people so that they're less productive. So I just want to get that out of the way first. But I think from an influencing perspective, it's how we treat people, how we relate to people, how we cast that vision for, and if I take a project specifically, how I cast that vision for the end result for my client. And I've been in situations where the casting the vision for my project team, my technical project team, wasn't in making the end user so happy in terms of the fact that their job is easier, but to actually look beyond them to see the citizens that they serve and how their lives are enhanced by what we're doing by building these things. So I think the whole idea of casting a vision, relating well, treating people well, all comes down to that ability to influence.
It's interesting. My ears perked up because you said that word influencer, and I've been studying internet influencers. There's an entire industry that's grown up around people who professionally influence, and it doesn't matter. Some of them exercise and health, some of them business and gig work, do-it-yourself careers, and some of them building a tiny house in the woods. And I'm watching about 5 or 6 influencers who've been living in tiny homes and cabins in the woods for 3 or 4 years. And it's fascinating. And how they sell their vision and how they promote their vision. And it actually is giving me a lot of great insight. And I came to the same conclusion you did, where an influencer is not a job title. It's a group of tasks, and it's a behavior we take in as leaders to actually promote what we are responsible for becoming successful.
Yeah, you did remind me, because I picked up this, you've probably seen the social media called TikTok.
Oh yeah.
Most of it's nonsense, but there are a few people on there that every once in a while will get on and follow. And it's not so much what they're influencing about, because they do have their subject matter, but it's how they're doing it. And a lot of it is based in how they have developed their personality, how they've developed their relatable style, even through the camera, so that when people are watching them, they're attracted to them. Not because they are attractive people, but because they have learned to be attractive through the way that they relate through the camera. And so that's a very, very solid kind of approach to being an influencer, even in what you and I do, and certainly on the project floor as we work with our staff. How is it that we relate to them? How is it that we project positivity and an ongoing influence from that perspective?
I was working back in 2006 with a company at that time that was about 170 years old. And the CIO was relatively young. She was 47 years old, relatively young. For me, she was relatively young. And she said, you know, Tim, we had to start talking about this data center transformation a year and a half ago. And we had to start communicating and talking about it, because we know that something that's so disruptive, if you don't get ahead of that and start, marketing it and motivating people, number one, they're going to fight it. Number two, they're not going to give you any good ideas. And as influencers, as project managers and leaders, that was one of the big aha moments for me, where I saw that, ABM, always be marketing. And marketing's not a bad word.
Yeah. And I tell you, influencing, and this is part of this, I think also was part of what we had talked about on several podcasts this year, was our ability as project managers to, in terms of this relatability, casting a vision, is to kind of do you and I talked about MWBA, management by walking around, and MBWA, management by walking around or wandering around. But also my approach before we went into this Zoom, this remote work process, was to always have my door open. Always, unless there was a confidential discussion with an employer on a telephone call, but always, always, always be open, because I didn't care if it was the person who was manning the reception desk or it was my personal manager. I needed them to have access to me because I had something they were looking for. And in being able to be open to them, relatable to them, we were able to foster that communication and foster that type of culture that we wanted on the project.
Yeah, and in the same breath, these stakeholders that we sometimes think inconsequential are our very eyes and ears. And we need to know what they know and what they're hearing. We need to know the most current and relevant changes that are occurring so we can be responsive.
Hence the MBWA, management by wandering around.
Exactly. It's not a bad thing.
I think your favorite, in fact, we call this PM coffee chat or PM coffee hour. I think part of your favorite conversation piece is to meet people in a lunchroom or in the coffee over a cup of coffee.
Cafeteria. I was just talking to my class about that today. It seems that having a one-on-one in a cafeteria creates a personal bubble, because it's just one-on-one, in a public arena, because in a cafeteria, everybody is real close, but everybody ignores everybody. And so it creates that opportunity for people to feel like they're in the open and they can get away if they need, but they can have that sense of confidentiality. And over a cup of coffee, especially if it's free, it becomes a very informal, casual conversation where, once again, people can drop their guard and relax and be very comfortable with who they are.
And also send a message to people who happen to see you that they have permission to do the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I started doing this back in 2007 or 8, and it created it wasn't an informal environment or informal relationships. It's still professional, but it was casual to a point where a lot of people gave the sense, and also told other people, I found out, that it was very easy to work with me and also express their opinions without being afraid of getting shot down.
Well, exactly. And it all comes down to, again, honoring the person. It doesn't matter what their position is. I reminded myself when I was a very senior project manager and also a project executive, I started as a developer. And it was only because someone took me under their wing that I was able to progress in my career, that I was able to learn from that person's mentorship or those persons' mentorship. And over the years, elevate myself to that position. But no person is beyond being honored just because they happen to not fulfill some high and lofty position on the project.
Right. There's a Simon Sinek tells a story where he knew a head of state who was a military leader. And one year, the guy was bringing a briefcase, and he walked into a room in preparation for the conference, and somebody brought him coffee with china. And then the next year, the guy was drinking out of a styrofoam cup. And Simon talked to him about it, noticing that this was happening. And the guy said, no, I always deserve a styrofoam cup. The china is for the person in the role. The role deserves the china. The person in the role deserves styrofoam.
That's an interesting aspect of exactly everything we've talked about the whole year.
Right. And again, it's all about people.
Yeah.
We have a lot to explore here and a lot to discuss.
And I'm so thankful that nowhere along the line, even when we discussed some of the more technical aspects of Gantt charts and PERT charts and how we do status reporting and earned value calculations and all of the things that we alluded to, we never left the whole idea of that it's the people that make things hum.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, both in the precise details and in the big picture. You and I, from our diverse perspectives, still were in total lockstep. And I don't just appreciate the conversation in somebody who agrees with me, but I appreciate the fact that, you know, whether you come from a great academic background or whether you come from, you know, learning from experience, it still leads you to the same results.
So that's an interesting thing, because I had brought up the fact earlier, or brought up the option earlier, about potentially having guests on, with guest project managers or people in project management roles with us next year. What do you think we're ready for someone who perhaps does not agree with us or throws some controversial curves at us?
Always. And again, it's the code of ethics. It's not my truth. I don't have to protect the truth. If I feel like I'm being attacked, it's my ego, and that's a problem. I don't have to protect the truth. And if my vision of the truth is limited, I want to know. And those are the conversations I want to be a part of.
Well, exactly. That's the, you watch what happens today over social media or even on some of the TV shows, and it's a personality attack or a personal attack as opposed to a discussion of ideas that people don't agree on. And I like that process. I think we should find guests next year who perhaps don't agree with the way we approach situations, and then just have that great discussion.
Yeah, and as managers and leaders, we should have the mindset to actually find value from all parts of the table to do that. It's debate. It's how good, strong, value-focused people grow together. It's inevitable that this is what keeps things going.
But it's funny, because just before you and I got onto this podcast today, I was in a Zoom meeting from a remote work perspective, and someone was showing PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. So someone was showing their PowerPoint presentation, and they got to this part where I was about to vehemently disagree. And suddenly a light bulb went on in my mind and said, wait, hear him out. And after he completed his discussion, I go, yeah, that could work. It's not the way I would do it, but yeah, that could work. Yeah. But I think that's the thing, is hear people out before you jump in with your own learned response.
Yeah, and we always get frustrated with our team members when they have that emotional response first. And we forget that the person in the mirror is a human as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And as IT, by the way, we've been talking about IT project management, which is our main, because you and I come from that background, we studied for it and that sort of thing. But a lot of the principles that we've been talking about over the year, I think are very beneficial to anybody who's got any kind of project that they're responsible for. It doesn't have to be IT. In our case, IT happens to be our bread and butter, so we talk more about that. But the principles that we've been talking about, And I think we could broaden our audience as well with people who are just generally interested in good leadership concepts on complex projects that they're undertaking.
Yeah, and again, if we have people out there who want to actually challenge the concept that project management is similar across industries, I have had experience with a lot of construction project management and a lot of business transformation, not just IT, but process movement and operational improvement and all these things. So I've worked around experts and I've learned a lot myself around this too. And so I think it would stand us to learn a lot and actually expose a lot to our learners or our listeners to how we can actually think about project management, not just as an industry, but as a transformative tool across all industries.
Because, and the reason I brought that up is because even in my own experience, I have rarely gone outside of my industry to learn. I mean, I've got my shelf of leadership books here. So general leadership principles, yes, but I think there are some processes that we could also pull in to what we do from other industries. So yeah, I'd be very interested, even as we bring on a guest, find a guest that's not in IT, but responsible for major projects and just talk through some of those issues.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah. Well, I think our hour is coming fast to an end. As always, this has been fun. Maybe not as deep as some of our previous podcasts, but probably to me, just as important, because we got to look back over what it was that we accomplished for the year. And I think we, without patting ourselves on the back, I think we did a pretty credible job for the year.
Yeah, and it also created a lot of value for some brainstorming and some idea generation on where we may continue to add value as well as learn ourselves in the next year.
And we're always learning, Tim. We're always learning, aren't
boy.
we? So where can we find you during the week?
I'm out at LinkedIn. I am over break going to be a little more visible there, and throughout the next year, you'll probably see me out there. I'm getting caught up, those of you who have sent me messages, and I will be continuing to catch up until I can have almost real-time conversations on LinkedIn again.
And I'm the same place, Merv Jersak. I've got a LinkedIn profile. And in fact, I was just asked to present my profile to someone that I'm supporting. They wanted to include me on their website as well. So it's, you just don't underestimate the value of that networking process and what we can do through things like LinkedIn. So yeah, it's a wonderful tool. Fortunately, it's one of those that, you don't get into these massive finger pointing, personality degrading arguments. It's just great discussion. So both you and I can show what we've learned over the years, what we've experienced over the years there, and people can certainly engage us in conversation.
Yeah, and in the year, I'm very interested in taking that conversation out to Twitter and Instagram. And as you see me out there, or as I start popping up, please look me up, and we'll be happy to carry our conversations out there for different things too.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Well, all I can say is have a much deserved time off during the holiday season, and we will be back at the beginning of the year.
Thanks again, Merv. It's always a pleasure, and everybody out there, looking forward to carry on the conversation next year.
Fantastic. And so we'll see you a year from now.
Sounds good. Thanks again.